Okay, so now that we have done the setup of our brushes, materials, and colors and all the other stuff, why don't we just go ahead and start texturing this character. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the tool subtool menu, and then I will select the mouse character. And of course, once I have him selected, I'm just going to go down into solo, and I'm going to make sure that everything else is turned off. Now, again, when you're painting, make sure that you're just painting on RGB. And the reason why you want to make sure that this is what you're using is because I don't want to affect any of the actual modeling that I have done. I really don't want to destroy any of the modeling that I've done. Now, if you've been painting, of course, or if you've been modeling this character and you have a lot of layers as well, you might want to make sure that you bake all your layers for your model. It might make things easier. If you have, of course, just like 1 or 2 wrinkle layers or vein layers, that's fine. But the more complex your layer menu gets, the more complex everything's going to get, just because ZBrush stores modeling data and color data in your layers, so it gets kind of tricky to control this kind of stuff. So usually what I do is once the model's been finalized, I'll just go ahead and just bake all, and then I'll work on the texturing after. Of course, again, leaving one layer, of course, with just, modeling data is fine. But if you've been kind of working in a nonlinear way, then usually it's best to just bake it and just, make sure the scene is kind of clean. Okay, so let's look for some colors to use on this character. Again, make sure your user is just using the RGB, and lazy mouse is off. So I'm going to paint this color on here, and let's see what we got. This isn't actually too bad. So I might end up actually using this color. But at the same time, I'm thinking that maybe, just maybe, it might be a little too dark. But at the same time, you know what? I will be giving other shades to this model anyways. I mean, his belly's going to be a lighter shade. The underneath of his arm will be a lighter, and all these parts. So in the end, all I'm doing right now is I'm just painting a base to kind of cover up the entire model. So that, of course, when I start shading this character, he's going to have many different shades. And of course, the one color that's going to be underlying all of it will be this one that I've chosen right here. There will be also some darker parts as well. Anyways, okay, so we have that. Let's find something lighter. That's not too bad. Might want to go a little bit lighter still and maybe desaturated more. Now, in the end, what I will be doing is I will be, in fact, doing something like, painting some other colors into here, maybe some form of red. And the reason why I will be doing that is mostly for the fact that, it is a living creature. I want him to, I want to give off the feeling that there is, in fact, blood through his veins. So for that reason, I want to do that. Now, when you're working on something like the hands, you'll notice that, it's not like this surface here where it's perfectly round and my cursor browser, Jesus, my mouse cursor is not big enough to wrap around the arm, especially not when it's this big. Of course, considering the hand, it's a lot more flat. What could happen is, especially when I paint on here, what you've noticed is that the cursor was wide enough to come through the other side. I don't want that. What I want to do is I want to do the same thing that I've did on my character when I was modeling him, especially when I was modeling on the ears. I used a brush setting in the auto masking area, and basically what I did is I turned on back face masking, and this allowed me to just paint on the front facing polygons on this model, especially towards my viewport right now, and not on the back facing one. So now if you notice, if I do that again, this part of the model has been untouched. Now it's usually a good idea to keep that setting on for the most part. But sometimes you actually do want to paint on both sides. So, and I will illustrate a case a little bit later in this video where I will actually want to have that setting off. So it's not like one of those things where you always want it off because, because it's bad, because sometimes you really do want to paint through. So I'm just going to lighten this up slightly. And of course, later I will be doing something more to this section overall anyways, especially underneath the arm. But for now, something like this will work just fine. And of course, if you've got a Wacom tablet, sometimes it's good to just, perhaps paint in one area hard, but then just kind of very subtly try to make some sort of like a fall off. So I'm back to painting the undersides of this character. And of course, if there's any bones or anything like that, I might want to make those sections a little bit brighter. Like that. Now, at this point in time, I'm really not too picky about my colors. All I want to do is just fill in some colors on this character and just try to get things going. So what I'm doing right now in terms of adding shading, I don't even really need to be honest, because right now the only thing that's important is just trying to get the base colors on this character knocked down as quickly as possible. That's the only thing that's important for me right now. Now I look at these lips, and to be honest, I might actually want to go a little bit brighter with my colors. And I think that'll work for the most part. You know what? I will be editing these colors a little bit later. So for now, again, just trying to get something that's going to fill in the entire base. And that is pretty good. Time to move on to the next section. Of course, the next section is just, I'm going to try to use the same colors that I've been using up to now. So I'll just focus on the eyes a bit. And of course, if you notice that, right now I'm not changing my brush right now much. I've kind of overpainted some areas. That's fine. I can always just edit and refine my colors later. This I actually made, this mistake I've done on purpose. I'm just going to go ahead and go over this area here. I'm going to press C to pick up this color. And now I'm just going to go over here like that and just refine this area. Now, one thing that you might have noticed when I did this, or especially when I'm trying to paint now, is again, I've mentioned this in my modeling series as well, is that when I zoom out, you'll notice that my cursor is the same size as it is here. But of course, since the model is now closer, in reality, this brush is actually smaller relative to the model. So I'm just going ahead, picking colors, and just painting wherever I can. And this is another time when really the backface option is actually bad in this case, because right now what I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure that when I painted across here, that if the brush was big enough, I really wanted to kind of fill in those back colors in here. Now, it doesn't really matter that much because, quite frankly, there's going to be eyeballs in there. But you know what? Let's see how we've actually colored it so far. So I'm just going to go down into the material, and I'm going to choose the flat color. And of course, you see that nothing happened, and that's because I already painted in my material. So in order for me to change it, I'm just going to go into M over here, and I am going to be affecting only the material now. as you can see. And of course, while I'm doing this, I'm going to make sure that my brush is big. That way I know that I am covering the majority of the model, if not all of it. Okay, so looking at this, you'll notice that there's a few sections in here that I have not covered. So you know what, let's cover them up now. I'm going to go back into RGB, and I'm just going to color in those sections like this. I'm just going to make sure that it's all nice and clean, so that we have a nice clean base to work from, so that when we go back into painting on top of this, I'll know that what I have is pretty solid. Okay, that works fine. So I'm just going to go ahead and zoom back out. I'm going to change this material back to Sketch Shaded 2. And of course, now I'm just going to go back into M. And actually, I guess it changed it, huh? All right. So anyways, now we have this material selected. So you know what? Let's work on the nose a little bit. So when I'm going to be painting the nose, usually we want these things, especially on these kind of animals, to be black. It depends from animal to animal. These noses can be, you know, in the brownish shades. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that it's not fully black, because, you know, usually when you texture, you don't really want anything to be purely black for the most part. And of course, the reason why is that if I go ahead now and I just go to RGB and I start painting on this section, you'll notice, I mean, yes, there's a specular highlight on here that's kind of bringing out some of the shape, but at the same time, if I paint over this, you'll notice that it can't really tell much of the shape in here. If I was going to undo that, and if I was going to choose something like, oh, I don't know, this, and now I paint in, what you'll notice is at the very least, I can see a black shade within this object. Of course, the nose is still pretty dark, and I still get to see the specular highlight on this, but at the same time, I still get to see some of the shading. So if you, for example, just go ahead and just use the spacebar or the other color pickers that are available under the color menu, under here. But anyways, I'm just going to use this space one here. If you use anything that's off the black, just slightly, then you're going to be going in the right direction. You really want to make sure that, you know, this stuff is dark. Now, you might notice that I'm kind of being sloppy with my colors here, but that's perfectly okay, because I can always press C anywhere on here, and then I can just cover that section back in. I can paint back inwards. So when I texture, you'll notice that I'll be pressing C a lot, and I'll be picking up my sample colors from the actual model and not going into the color picker every 3 seconds. So that's kind of done. Let's work on the inside of the ear. I'm going to just go ahead and just pick this color in here, and I'm going to make it darker because I really don't want it to. Actually, you know what? Yeah, I guess that should be okay. What I really want is to make sure that this color and this color kind of, you know, they're similar in intensity, or luminosity rather, so that I don't have a really bright color for the ear, but it is a different saturation overall. And this works fine. Just remember, when you're working on the ears, you really do want to make sure that auto masking is on inside of the brush menu. Okay, so we have this character kind of, you know, colored in. You know, it's not final, but I can always refine it a little bit later. Let's go into the other objects, just briefly. I'm going to just start working my way down. So the next up is the eyes. Of course, right now you notice that, of course, I am in solo mode. And you know what? Let's turn that off, because what I want to do, of course, is I want to start picking up some of these colors around the eyes to use them on the actual eyes themselves. So, you know what? Before I start doing that, however, I'm just going to go into the eyes. I'm going to pick a color, and I'm just going to start painting. Of course, it might actually be a good idea to just go into solo now temporarily. And of course, one thing you might notice is that these eyes right now are 1 million polygons. That's a bit much, so let's go down into geometry. Let's lower the polygon count. And of course, I wanted to make these eyeballs somewhat smooth, so that's fine, but I'm just going to go ahead and just delete higher. Right, so right now this object also has layers. I'm just going to bake all the layers. I really don't need them right now. Especially not for the eye. So I'm going to paint over all of it. Now, of course, these eyes really are just placeholders. I really don't care about them too much, to be honest. I'm just going to go ahead and delete higher. And I'm going to go back into here and turn off solo mode. And now I have something like this. And, you know, it's okay. It's a little bit, maybe, you know, my color's kind of off. I really want a slightly more grayish color. So I'm going to start working my way towards the grays. And let's see what we can get. And this color is actually a little bit better, but I still want to make the eyes a little bit darker. And you know what? I think this will work. Now, of course, I don't want the eyes to be overall this kind of flat color. What I want is I want to have some redness, especially towards the outer edges on this eye. So I'm going to go ahead and just pick one of these colors here. And then I'm going to go into transparency. And now I'm going to go ahead and just paint in some of that redness into the eye. And of course, once you have enough of that, it might be a good idea to just go ahead and just go into solo mode. Just color in the rest. Like that. Okay. So that's pretty good. Next part, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to start adding the actual pupil and retina to this eye. So I'm going to change the stroke to the drag rectangle. I'm then going to set a base, and of course the base is going to be dark, and then I'm going to start lightening the color for the actual retina, and then I'm going to go ahead and just draw in a dark pupil. So let's draw something darkish, and I think this color will do just fine. And start at the center or as close as you can to it, and then draw outwards. And of course this right now has a very linear fall off, and I don't want that. What I want is I want to draw a circle that's pretty harsh, but it's also got a slight fall off at the edge. So let's undo that by pressing Ctrl Z. And now I'm going to make sure that I am selecting an alpha. And of course the alpha that I'm going to choose is the alpha 12. You'll notice that it is in fact intense in the center, and then the sides are, you know, they have a slight fall off. So now if I do the same, you'll notice that now, of course, the center here is a lot more intense, and there's only a slight fall off on the edges here. And you know what? I'm going to make that slightly larger, like this. So next up, I'm going to want to choose a color for the actual eyes, and I'm going to, I think, just go in for a green, and I'm going to test it out and see what I get. That's okay-ish. Now, of course, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to make sure that I kind of fade in a color. Right now my RGB intensity is 1, so let's make this, I don't know, about 30 or 40%, and I'm going to go over this area multiple times to try to make the intensity slightly stronger as I place in more and more of these drag rectangles here. And I think that's more or less going to work. Again, this eye right now is just a placeholder. And of course, once I'm done the center, I'm just going to darken this up And at this point in time, I guess for the pupil especially, you could just go all the way to like pure black and just fill that in. Now, of course, if you're going to do this, at this point in time, it's always better to just go ahead and just use the 100% on RGB intensity. I just paint it in, just once. Okay, so the eye is pretty good. Again, this is just a placeholder. I probably would have chosen different colors for the overall eye, but this will do. Okay, so that's set. The next part that I'm going to want to work on is, of course, making sure that I color in the actual clothes and the teeth. So you know what? Let's work on the teeth very quickly. And of course, I'm just using Alt and left clicking on the teeth. I can just go back to solo mode, and then I'm just going to choose a color for these teeth. And of course, I don't want to be in mRGB. I want to be just in RGB. And of course, at this time, I also want to make sure I turn off my drag rectangle. So I'm just going to turn off drag rectangle and just go back to dots or freehand. Either or will work just fine. And of course, when I'm painting on the teeth, I really want to choose a color that's, be picky about your colors for the most part. This is starting to get kind of to skin tone. So I'm going to work my way back to the yellows, and maybe I might make them a little bit darker. I don't want too much saturation, but at the same time, I want some. Okay, I turn off solo, see how that color works. And you know what? That color actually works okay for the teeth, but I might want to make them slightly lighter, so I'm just going to press space. Just make them slightly lighter and see how it works. And you know what? Maybe a little bit more yellow. Again, see how that works. And that's actually pretty good. So now I'm going to select these teeth here. And of course, let's see if it actually painted over the entire object. So just go to solo mode. And of course, I am still in, I still got auto masking on. And at this point in time, I really don't want it. So I'm just going to go back into brush mode, turn off backface masking. And this way, at least I'll know that it's drawing through the object and, filling in everything. Now, of course, it might be important for me to select the inner teeth on this character. So instead of Alt left clicking, which might get a little tricky, especially when you're working inside the object, I'm just going to go ahead and just select my object within the tool subtool menu. Now I have colored a little bit of this. Again, I was experimenting with colors a little bit earlier. So some of these objects might already have object or color. And of course, when you're painting, you really want to be in symmetry mode. Now you can see that for this object, I didn't have my symmetry mode enabled. So I might as well just press X, or not C, but X, to turn on symmetry. And then of course, always go back into solo mode, make sure that you're filling everything in like that. Of course, last object inside the mouth is going to be the tongue. You can see here that the tongue is selected. I'm going to once again go back into solo mode, make sure that I fill in as much of the object as possible. And of course, later on, we're going to be applying shading to all these objects. But for now, all I want is just colors. So let's very quickly work on the belt. Let's choose a brownish color. And of course, the belt is really one of those objects where you want to make sure that auto masking is off. If I go into solo, you'll notice that it's been painted all the way around. If I go into backface masking and I choose whatever color for this belt, one thing you'll notice is that of course the other side is completely untouched. It's a completely different shade. So for the most part, you want to make sure that backface masking is off, unless of course you actually do want to use that, that function. It really is up to you, depending on what your needs are. If you want the double-sided texture or material, then that's perfectly fine. Go for it. In my case, this belt is one piece of leather for the most part, or several, but they're made out of the same leather, so the colors on both sides are meant to be the same. Okay, so let's go ahead and work on the pants. And of course the pants will be a slightly lighter color. And once again, you really want to make sure that your symmetry is on. So let's do that. Now, I should also mention that right now I am also painting at the highest subdivision level on this model. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to do that, because quite frankly, you'll notice that I'm not exactly working at the fastest speed here. I could speed up the entire process if I had worked slightly differently. And what I mean by that is if I had gone ahead and worked at a lower subdivision, I could have easily painted on this character and only focused on putting down the very, very base colors on this character. And of course that would have made a few things a little bit simpler. And again, make sure you're in symmetry mode for all objects, especially when you're filling in the base colors. It really is important during the stage, just to speed things up. Now I'm going to select the belt buckle, and I'm going to make it a shade color. That'll do. And now you can see most of the character is filled in. The only thing that I'm just going to worry about now is just the t-shirt. So I'm going to go into the shirt. Maybe choose something a little bit more orangey. Now again, I did experiment with some colors on this model previously, so there is some texture already on him, but I'm just going to paint over all of that. Now you might also notice that the material on this shirt is also different, so I'm going to make sure that I paint over that material with M or even mRGB, either or will work. Make sure once again you're in symmetry mode, so press X on your keyboard to enable that. And just go back in and paint over the object. So I think for the most part this will work. Now the only thing I really don't like right now is that the fact that these pants are really similar in color to the actual skin. So I'm going to go ahead and just sample that. I'm going to press space on my keyboard to get me a bigger color picker. And of course I'm just going to keep looking at this color here and going to try to get something that looks a little different. And you know what? I guess this could kind of work. At the same time, what I should also note is the fact that, this character is also going to have a lot more layers of skin. His skin is going to be a lot darker on some parts and a lot lighter on some parts. And of course, there's going to be many different hues. So at the end of the day, these pants and this skin will really be a different color anyways. So I don't have to worry, completely. But again, for now, all I want is just to fill in the colors. I want to see exactly where it is that I'm going to head with these colors. And that's pretty much it. So I guess before we leave this chapter, the last thing I want to do is I just want to go in and fill in the fingernails. And of course, when I'm going to be filling the fingernails, I'm just going to go ahead and select this color here for the skin. And then I'm going to I'm going to go to a slightly lighter hue or shade. And of course, I'm going to change my mode of painting to RGB again, because all I want to do is I just want to change the colors on the model and not the material, not at this point in time. And of course, the one mistake I've made so far is that I have not selected my mouse for texturing purposes. So when I'm doing things like fingernails, of course, sometimes on some creatures you do want to bring them out, but sometimes you want the fingernails to be a very similar color to the rest of the hand. So when I zoom out, this will actually work just fine. The one thing I might want to do, however, is just make it a little bit more desaturated, but keep it, you know, on this line here. And of course, it is a little too red, so I'm just going to change that. See that? Now you might have noticed that it got a little bit darker, like that. And this will work just fine. So let's go down into the toes. And of course, once I finish this chapter will be over, and I'm going to start focusing on things like adding some variation to the actual skin colors by using alphas and random brush strokes and a bunch of other things like that, and you know, blending in a lot of details. And I'm going to start using layers and stuff like that a little bit after that. So as far as this chapter goes, I think that's all I wanted to cover. I just wanted to make sure that I fill in all the base layers. I went over a little bit over the alpha, the stroke, the choosing your materials, and of course painting with mRGB or RGB or just M. And I think that's really all I wanted to go over in this particular chapter. So until the next one.